Bring Me the Horizon is one of the most instantly recognizable names in modern extreme music. They're a 5-piece British metal group from Sheffield who formed in 2004, and they're signed to legendary Epitaph Records and have amassed a cult following over the years since their debut album Count Your Blessings in 2006, with their underground smash Pray for Plagues, which found it into any emo kids playlist and cemented them as one of the trend-setting flagship bands for the MySpace metalcore scene, as well as one of the only bands out of that scene that were successfully able to transition into the mainstream, as that scene inevitably died its untimely death, with a number of their records performing unreasonably well on the UK and even North American charts. They've had an interesting progression where they've gone from teen goth heartthrobs to butt rock radio gods and even into critical acclaim territory. It seems nobody can make up their mind about this group, and I will say I definitely think they have their bright moments, and I'd be lying if I said there isn't a few classic jams of theirs in my library. This album's coming out after last year's Ammo, which is a polarizing release that saw a departure from the sounds of Sempiternal and That's the Spirit, which had begun to win critics over, and stepping into a more pop and synth-driven sound. This record does sound like a progression from what they were doing there, but it definitely doesn't come without its hitches. I love the choice to keep it short and sweet at 32 minutes. It's very easy to sit through and it doesn't feel flabby or overwhelming to take on. All right, let's get into the track by track. I don't want to be too misleading with this review and make it seem like I love this record, because that's just not the truth. But goddamn do I ever love this opening track. It's just so aggressive right out of the gates. Ollie sounds like a monster with these guttural hardcore inspired screams, and then the song just cuts loose from its reins and explodes into this insane groove. We get unhinged animated vocals, blistering grooves, a dope Iron Maiden style guitar solo, and these really cool little breakdown sections where Ollie like kind of spoken word raps and his accent really pokes through a lot, and man, it sounds fucking cool. There is so much going on this track. You have to listen to it at least 3 or 4 times to really grasp what's happening, but once you wrap your white knuckles around it, it's a fucking exhilarating ride. And then the breakdown at the end of the track with Ollie laughing is just so edgy. I love how it drops down in volume and energy and then just like blasts back in for one more face-melting breakdown, and that's just the spiky blood-covered cherry right on top of the viscera cake. Now, I don't mean to blow my load right away, but this is definitely the best song on the album, in my opinion. But let's see what else this mixed bag has to offer. Okay, the instrumental on this cut's pretty cool. It kind of sounds like something you might even hear Die Antwoord over, with these pulsating and swelling, filtered, howling, sputtering synths. It actually opens up with these really unsettling foreign choir chops, which make it feel like something really epic's about to happen, but it actually switches up and kind of tapers into this nocturnal dance groove for the verses. Then the floor kit and the guitars come crashing in for a bombastic chorus and a loud, quiet, loud dynamic that really keeps the flow of the song interesting. It builds from section to section nicely, but honestly, the song is like 2 minutes too long. The lyrics are clearly focused around the COVID-19 experience and the whole quarantine thing, and they're spun in a typically campy horror aesthetic. Like there's one really cringy part where he like weaves talking about sneezing into it, and he literally does like a sneeze ad lib, and it's just so cringe every time. I can't deal with it. It's too much. There's this sterile female vocal that pokes in and kind of like warns us the end is near and to remain calm. Also a little bit corny and campy, which brings me to my first big complaint about this record. The lyrics. They're very edgelord, and I'm sure it sounds good to younger people, and that's fine, but I kind of have to tune out the lyrics if I want to enjoy this project, honestly. I mean, look at the name of this song. Parasite Eve, the chorus, it's a Parasite Eve. It's very 15-year-old goth English binder quote, if you ask me. And I don't care for the whole overused "this is war" trope, especially when Ollie's like right in my fucking ear. Like, this is war. It's too much. It's just, However, the lyrics, when we forget the infection, will we remember the lesson? I don't mind. I think those are kind of cool. It's definitely a sentiment that I've kind of pondered in the past. Intro to this track reminds me immediately of Linkin Park, which I mean, I guess is nothing new for these guys, but there's literally like a song that they're ripping off. I can't quite put my finger on it. I like the drum production a lot on here. It's very big and it complements that buzzing bass line really nicely. Definitely has like an early to mid 2000s aesthetic that gets my nostalgia going. It's definitely catchy, but I kind of find it very wash, rinse, and repeat as far as the choruses go. It's like, here's your big catchy moment, here's your chorus, like, eat it up. I do think Ollie shows off his versatility really well here and kind of puts any claims that his vocal box is fried to rest. I do really wish that he screamed more. I mean, the man sounds so good when he comes unhinged. The song's kind of lukewarm for me. I mean, it's definitely not bad, but it definitely doesn't stick out of the track list to me either. I will say my inner emo kid does dig the refrain here, "The emptiness is heavier than you think." It's pretty simple but blunt and effective way to communicate a feeling, I think, most of us have probably experienced. However, some of the other refrains like "nothing makes me sadder than my head," I could really do without. I'm not really sure if my love for this next track comes from the fact that I'm still like a 13-year-old emo kid at heart, or the fact that it actually kind of bangs. But there's a decent amount of personality here, honestly. Best of all, it doesn't come off forced catchy, or like the genre mashing is too forced. The instrumental is bombastic and it nicely straddles the edge between hip hop and metal aesthetic. Kind of feels like a healthy progression from some of that new metal of the late 90s or even the butt rock of the 2000s. Usually I would not consider myself a Youngblood fan, I'll be honest. His vocals are good, but I guess I kind of resent the fact that he's the latest sad boy poster child who's just edgy enough to excite the teenage girls, but just good looking enough to not scare them away. He's like Pete Wentz 2.0. That being said, I do really like his contribution to this track, and I find his vocals to be quite nimble in the mix. I like his fry scream quite a bit. The mixing on this song is just heavy as fuck too at some point, especially when all the instruments are blaring and Ollie and Youngblood are just screaming their guts out. Yeah, this is definitely an album highlight if you ask me. If you're gonna check anything out, it's gonna be the first cut or this one. Ah, yes. Exactly what I wanted. Bring Me the Horizon's take on a drum and bass song. I barely like this genre when it's done well, and honestly, here it's not. What the fuck is this? This sounds so cheap and thin. It's like some sort of like K-pop inspired thing. There's these little vocal chops at the end that just sound so corny, man. I guess the beginning of it's like okay with these like sort of rapped, chattery vocals and these skitching sort of synth soundscapes. But as soon as that drop comes, man, I'm out of there. Ugh, never listen to that again. Now, being the fact that I find Baby Metal, the guest on this next cut, pretty irritating, I find their style really mixes like oil and water. I really didn't have high hopes for this cut, but plot twist, it's actually kind of a banger. The buzzsaw guitars and live kit mixed in here sound great. That's one thing I will give this album, is the mixing is impeccable and the energy is really firing on all cylinders. But I gotta say again, Baby Metal contribution on this cut doesn't really do anything for me. Honestly, just really sounds shoehorned in there if you ask me. Until the bridge, where I guess they kind of fit in, but even then I could do without it. It honestly kind of sounds like an anime intro just railed a bunch of PCP and got his cheeks clapped by a clown. And then they bring back that horrible drum and bass motif for a few moments here. Again, the heavier parts of this cut sound pummeling and fantastic, but the more poppy areas just sound forced and honestly fall pretty flat for me. Next up another mixture of rap and pop and metal, and at this point it's like, we get it guys, like you're super forward thinking and you're mashing a bunch of genres together and you're innovative, but like it's starting to feel like a just cause you can doesn't mean you should sort of situation. And also, not to sound like a broken record, but Linkin Park. The featured guest here, Nova Twins, they deliver a pretty compelling performance in my opinion, but it does kind of go from sounding like Halsey on a metal track and transitions into like a Hailstorm butt rock kind of vibe that really leaves a sour taste in my mouth. I feel like I'd really like this song if I was like 15 or 16, which honestly is maybe what they're going for. The more I listen to this album, I feel like these guys are trying to win over a new and younger generation of fans, which is fine, I get it. It's how they've kept their head above the water so far. Kind of like the industrial restrained vibe on this one. I really like the galloping tom groove, and I finally feel like we're not forcing styles together too hard. Ollie sounds great as usual and actually manages to not make me cringe really at all over the duration of this cut. His vocal performance is actually pretty charismatic and cool. The song itself is super catchy and it'll definitely get your head bobbing. There's this tasty little electronic percussion break in the middle of the track that always makes me kind of stop what I'm doing and pay attention again. And then it just kind of slaps back in with this metalcore style breakdown. Ollie just screams out, "Give me a break," and then there's this stop in the music where there's a sample of this little girl saying, "Okay," and then everything drops back in. It's honestly so memorable to me, and I look forward to it every time. I'd say this is probably the third and final song on this record that I would wholeheartedly recommend to a listener. Okay, here we are. Final track, track 9. Now when I saw that goth queen Amy Lee was featured on this track, naturally I got excited. I mean, she's literally the reason I have the hots for goth girls now. But unfortunately, the song, kind of a snoozer. The vocal performances are good enough, but I feel like the instrumental's a little too melodramatic for me. And I don't know how I feel about the whole goth duet vibe. It honestly sounds like the part in a musical where the lover's world is crumbling around them or they're torn apart. It's like pretty well done, but I just can't think of a time where I'd toss this track on to vibe. All these verses pretty good, but it's not enough to save the song when you're having 40 cc's of liquid melodramatic bluff pumped right into your bloodstream. It does bookend the album pretty well, I guess, with a nice change in pace from the insanity of the whole record. There's this tasty little swell at the end where you actually feel like the song's gonna do stuff and then it kind of just stops, which I don't mind, admittedly, because it kind of leaves you wanting more and it makes you want to throw the album on again, but at the same time I never really get that feeling of closure with the record. Overall, I thought this was like a pretty good effort from these guys, especially being that they've been in the scene and switched up their sound so many times over the years. I can definitely appreciate that they've found a sound that I think will catch like a modern or contemporary younger audience's ear. However, I can't fully sink my teeth into it because it sounds a little too melodramatic and smashed together for my liking. Just makes me miss the days of Pray for Plagues. There's a few songs that I would cherry pick from this record, but overall, wouldn't probably return to the album as a whole. I feel like alternative, heavier music, or even some of the more mainstream stuff like Machine Gun Kelly's new album, or Youngblood, or even rappers like Ghostmane or Bones, then I'd check this album out, honestly. You might like it more than I do. I would give this album a solid 3 out of 5. The best tracks are Dear Diary, Obey, and Ludens, and I would say the best time to listen to it is after a big blowout fight with your big titty goth GF. That's gonna do it, everybody. Thanks for listening, and remember, anyone can piss their pants, but it takes a real man to piss his shirt too.